So with the Sonos Roam right around the corner, I thought that we'd check out Sonos a little bit because I've never featured any of their products on the channel. So we're going to start off with the Sonos Beam, their entry-level soundbar. Now, even though, yeah, you can get a great-looking 4K TV these days for not all that much, if you're still using your TV's built-in speakers, you're going to be missing out on a lot. So first there's price. The Sonos Beam retails for $400, which isn't too bad. Now for the purpose of this review, we're going to be looking at the Beam by itself, but you can always pair it up to the Sonos Sub, which retails for $700, which I do feel is a little pricey. So yeah, I don't think a lot of people are going to be pairing the Beam to the Sub because the Sub costs almost twice as much as the soundbar itself. Nonetheless, if you're going to pick this soundbar up, it'll be linked down below. Now, first let's talk about the design of this soundbar. Personally, I think the Beam has a cozier look to it because it has this fabric mesh wrapping its body and it has this concave top. Whereas a lot of other soundbars will opt for a more industrial look to them because they'll have a metal grill on the front and then they'll just be flat on all sides. Now, the Beam does have a rather small footprint featuring a length of 25.5 inches and a width of 4 inches. But I can't help but feel that this soundbar is a little on the thicker side because it does have a thickness of 2 3/4 inches. Now, there aren't any display panels on this soundbar, which I think is great. Soundbars should be heard, not seen. But there are 2 indicator lights on top of this soundbar, which thankfully you can power off through this soundbar's app. Now, up top, there are also a few capacitive buttons which you can use to control your music playback. You can tap on either side to raise or lower your volume, and you can skip through your music by just simply swiping. Now, personally, I think it's great when soundbars have their own built-in control buttons because a lot of people like to use their soundbars to play music when they're entertaining guests. So I think it's great that at least you or your guests have the option of controlling your music directly from the soundbar itself without having to always rely either on your phone, TV remote, or voice assistant. So overall, the Sonos Beam is a compact soundbar that you aren't going to notice too much, which is something that we want from a soundbar. But now let's talk about tech specs. Regarding ports, it's pretty simple. We've got an AC port on the back for power, there's an HDMI port so that you can hook it up to your TV, and there's an Ethernet port if you want to hook this soundbar directly into your network. Now, I'm just saying, if you're still suffering from spotty Wi-Fi, then you really want to look into getting a new access point. And finally, there's also this pairing button if you decide to go with the Sonos Sub. Now, I want to quickly bring attention to the included cables here, because these cables feel very premium. Specifically, these cables are very flexible and they're pretty long. So these more premium cables does make it easier to wire this soundbar into your setup. Now, it isn't a huge deal, but I do feel it's a very nice touch. However, one very important thing to point out here is that this soundbar doesn't have an optical port. Now, you do get this optical port to HDMI adapter just in case your TV doesn't have an HDMI ARC port, but it's pretty clear that Sonos would rather you use an HDMI connection with the Beam. But another very important thing to point out here is that the Beam actually comes included with its own HDMI cable, which is a very nice touch because there are a lot of other soundbars out there that still only come included with an optical cable. And if you want to use an HDMI connection, and you should use an HDMI connection, then you're going to have to get your own HDMI cable. Now, continuing on the topic of connectivity, the Beam has Wi-Fi and AirPlay 2 support, which is great if you're an iPhone user, because as long as you're connected to your Wi-Fi, you can stream music to the Beam from any of your other Apple devices. And if you're signed into your Sonos account, either on an iPhone or an Android device, you can also still just stream music to the Beam. But unfortunately, the Beam doesn't have Bluetooth. So let's say your friend is coming over and they want to DJ. They can't just easily connect to the soundbar using a Bluetooth connection. I just feel that this soundbar's over-reliance on the Sonos app and Wi-Fi to stream music to the soundbar does have a bit of a walled garden effect, which personally I am not a fan of. Now, while we're on the topic of Wi-Fi, I do want to mention voice assistants because I feel it is tangentially connected. The Beam has support for both Google Assistant and Alexa, so if you want to, you can always just use the soundbar as a smart speaker, and you can always use the voice commands to control your music playback. And if you're using Alexa, you can always use Alexa voice commands to control your TV. Alexa, what is the current price of Bitcoin?
One Bitcoin is worth $58,340 up less than 1% over the last 24 hours.
But if you don't want to, you don't have to use a voice assistant on this soundbar. Some people don't like using voice assistants because of security concerns, but personally, I don't like using voice assistants on my soundbars because of accidental activations while I'm watching something, which can be a little annoying. Now, when it comes to speaker setups, there's actually a lot going on under here. The Beam has a single tweeter right in the center. There are two frontward firing woofers flanking either side of the tweeter. There's also a second pair of woofers on either end cap of the soundbar that shoot out at like a 45-degree angle. And then there's a pair of frontward firing radiators, and there's a third radiator that shoots out the back for bass. So there's definitely a lot going on under the hood here. Now, through Sonos' app, you can also adjust the EQ of this soundbar. Now, just as a heads up before we jump into the sound test, we are using my EQ settings here, where I lowered the treble and raised the bass a little bit, because right out of the box, this soundbar does skew a little more towards the brighter side. But with all that being said, let's jump into the sound test.
Bamboozled for the foozles. Yeah, I said it. Heads up, got one here. Shots fired. Serving him an apple sandwich.
We got him. Another one down.
Gotta fight till the end, no pressure, no pressure. And I find it hard to say no, but I want something better. But I want to never say never. You'll be my pleasure. I got nothing to be scared of.
So, like you just heard, obviously the soundbar is going to sound way better than your TV's built-in speakers. Most likely your TV just has a pair of downward firing transducers that bounces sound off of the table. Now, besides your TV's built-in speakers just not sounding as open or getting as loud as a soundbar, the biggest issue for your TV's built-in speakers is just going to be the bass. In the sound test, when the bass really got going, all you heard was this rattling mess. Whereas with the Beam, there is no rattling. Now overall, the Beam sounds good and it's definitely going to add an extra level of immersiveness. But like I mentioned before the sound test, the Beam does skew a little towards the brighter side. Now having a brighter sound signature is good because it does put an emphasis on the vocals and dialogue. But when it comes to bass and actually feeling what's on TV, the soundbar does leave you wanting a little more. Now, in general, you shouldn't expect a whole lot of wall-shaking bass from your soundbar, and if you really want a lot of bass, you can always pick up the Sonos Sub. But when compared to other soundbars in the same price range and with similar speaker setups, the Beam just isn't pumping out as much wall-shaking bass as its competition. So overall, the Beam sounds good and is definitely going to be an upgrade over your TV's built-in speakers, but the Beam doesn't sound as full when compared to similarly priced or designed soundbars on the market because it does lack a little bit when it comes to bass. Now, you could always spring for the Sonos Sub and then that would be a whole other story, but for the purpose of this review, we are evaluating the Beam by itself. So with all that being said, the Sonos Beam is a decent soundbar that's obviously going to sound way better than your TV's built-in speakers. It's compact and has a very subtle design to it, so this soundbar is simply heard and not seen. If you want, you can either use Alexa or the Google Assistant with this soundbar, and through its app you can adjust how this soundbar sounds. Now, even though the Beam sounds decent, this soundbar does skew a little towards the brighter side, and its bass can leave you wanting more. Now, even though it's great that the Beam has AirPlay 2 support, which could be very useful for iPhone users, I feel that its over-reliance on Wi-Fi and lack of Bluetooth could be a quirk for some fringe cases to look out for. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.